This is
defaulted on it.
Stewart. His last name is Stewart. This is,
Yeah, that's a
All
different
right,
name.
if we could have the camera, please.
I'll have to ask. That's my thought. So that went away.
There we go. If everyone, well, we'll call it to order. It looks like 6:03. That's on me. If everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Could you have roll call, please?
Councilpersons Breeding. Present. Higgins.
Here.
Kelsey.
Here.
Parkinson.
Here.
Ross.
here.
Salcido.
Here.
And Mayor Carnes.
Here. Okay, well, get this thing situated. This is a study session, impromptu called, I guess. You could say that the need arises as our city manager, Mr. Koppler, has given us notice that he intends to leave our fair city to place a little bit on the east side, St. Clair Shores. So if everything goes as expected later on this evening, then it would be a 2-month time, that, at which point we will need to address or have a new city manager. Some things that need to be discussed during this next half-hour segment is how we are looking to continue in the form of government. We have had a city manager form where for the last I think it goes back to 2004, 2003, at which point it was incorporated in with Mr. Duchesne. So we need to decide if that is what we want to continue on, and if we are going to continue on with a city manager, obviously we need to have a replacement. In the past, we have gone and had one of our employees be an interim city manager. With the way that our staff is cut short nowadays, putting an extra task onto somebody else would not behoove us, in my opinion, to do so. So if we're going to continue on, it would be my recommendation that we would go for an interim city manager. Now, with an interim city manager, you have different choices. We can look and advertise for an interim and interview the folks and put that person in position while we conduct a search for our city manager. The most successful ways that I've seen with going out and looking for a city manager is to employ a group and have them physically, not headhunt, but go out and present Lincoln Park out there, what we're looking for, do an investigation among all of us and what we're looking for with a city manager, and then have viable candidates that come in that we would be able to interview. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that, but I think that the process through Brad Coulter with the emergency manager when he was here that brought Mr. Koppler to us worked out well for us. So I think that somewhere along those lines, it may be necessary for us to do. I think that we are fortunate that we have a period of time that Mr. Koppler is going to be remaining with us. In fact, it would behoove us to have at least an interim in place a good 2 weeks before he were to leave, so that there is a smooth transition of power or authority, so that the different things that Mr. Koppler has been working on, instigating, putting forward, can continue on. So with that, I'll just open it up for discussion at this point. I don't think, did you have anything you wanted to say at the start? Less is more? Okay.
May?
Yes, go ahead.
The way we handled it the last time with that outside firm, I was very pleased. I was pleased with the outcome, obviously. But even the candidates that they sent, I appreciated the fact that they were not from around this area, so they didn't know anything about the city, and where that's a negative on one part, because then they have to get to know how we operate and how things are. But it didn't bring any bias in. There was no whatever. And so it really worked out well. We were very fortunate to have Matt. But we're not going to have Matt any longer, so I think that rather than us just advertising locally, that we really do need to have this outside company come and bring us some candidates so that we have the chance to interview and to actually make a determination on who's going to move forward. One more point, though, as far as having an interim, and I know that management doesn't agree with me, but we have a finance director and a director of operations. And if Matt's going to be here for another 2 months, by then most of the audit will be pretty well rolling and everything. I really think that that person that is director of operations who stands in currently for the city manager should have to be the one to fill the gap before we actually find another candidate.
My argument for you on that is that going for a permanent city manager is a process that could take 6 months, 7 months. And you don't want that person doing double duty with that. And at that point, as I mentioned, Mr. Koppler would be long gone by that period of time. And then the roles that a finance director or director of operations, whoever is, that's still double duty for them. So I would argue that.
Remember it taking 6 months. Did it take us 6 months before?
It took them a long time in order to get, because you have to send out you have to do the
Initial,
queries
yeah.
out there for that. You have to give that some time to come in, then they have to be investigated, and then we get our crew in here, whether it's 5 or 5 to 10 possibility. And then when we narrow that down, that's going to take some time in order to make the right decision on that. It may take less than that, but I think it would be a 6 month on the outside.
Good point.
Yeah,
Good
Just
point.
just to kind of run through that time frame. So we have to bid out the recruiting firm. So right there, we're not doing anything until we get the notice to proceed, which would be at the next meeting, most likely. They would take about 2 to 3 weeks to prepare everything in terms of,
Bidding on it?
yeah. So, I mean, you're already in to October, probably before the first, or close to when the first ad goes out. And then you have about 45 days for submittal. I mean, you could shrink that down a little bit, but give it 30 to 45 days. Another 2 weeks for them to go through and do the, narrowing it down to the number that you want them to narrow it down to, and then coming back to meet with you to pick
And then you got to negotiate.
then you have the interviews, negotiation, and again, if they are a manager somewhere, they're probably going to have in their contract that they have to give X amount of days' notice, which would be anywhere from 30
Then you can't
to 90
hold.
days. So, it's probably very realistic that they wouldn't be starting until sometime in January or February, yeah.
Well, we could, in the RFP, when we put out, we could also ask for them to provide an interim, because some of the companies will provide an interim city manager.
This headhunter or this company that's
Yeah,
going to be.
I know that there are a couple that would do that.
Yeah.
NNL, I believe, is one that would.
I know that through the MME, which is partnered with MML, so MME is the Manager Association. There are people that are retired or in transition managers that would work with MML on doing something like that. HR Gov USA or HR USA Gov or something like that. They provide that service. And there's probably about 5 or 6 different recruiting firms that provide that service in addition to the recruitment. But again, and let me just say that I would agree 100%. There's no doubt in my mind that the finance director can do the job for you. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that she can do that.
She's done it before.
The concern I have outside of, if you start looking at the time frame, so you have the audit, which really is getting underway in October for the most part. That's when they're coming out here and the boots are in the ground and they're doing everything that they're doing, although they're starting now, it's really in October when they come out and do a lot of that work. That usually ends by December when they come in and do the presentation to you. That leads right into the budget process. And again, I think you might be cutting short then the ability of the finance director to lead that process as well, because there's not a lot of depth beneath her that, can fill and do what she's doing. But again, I think if we could figure that issue out, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that she could do everything necessary to keep the city going.
So through the chair,
Yes, ma'am.
so question then, is getting an interim, is that a long process too?
It depends on which way that we go with it. If we decide to do and look for an interim outside of the group that is going to be doing, say, the headhunter, for lack of a better term for that, then we're going to have to advertise for that, have to have people submit resumes, and it's the same process as hiring a permanent one, I would imagine.
So if we use the recruiting firm, then they already have like a pool?
As you said, that in Michigan,
And do
the
we have?
MME.
So then they would, submit some names?
Yeah,
I
so-
mean, like we would
I
still
would-
have a choice?
I would think that they would have candidates, maybe 3 to 5, that we could interview and, decide on one, or that we don't like any of them and start over again. But
Yep. The list that the municipal or MME has on their website are for the most part the candidates that would be available because they're retired managers or in transition. There are some others, and again, I've been contacted by people saying they would be interested if that's the case. I think you could do a modified search to get the interim. I mean, make very very quick process, because again, you're probably looking for someone that's either was a manager, most likely was a manager, and has that experience. And so it really is locally it's limited to the number of people that would be able to qualify for that.
Real quick, then I have a question. If in fact through this MME, they have individuals that have already voiced their desire, whatever you want to call it, then would you have, because you're associated with these and you're part of that unit, do you have some that you would currently recommend as an interim? I mean, do you have any names that you were personally? Yes? Well, maybe
Yeah,
we
I
should-
could get you names tomorrow.
Maybe we should start with at least seeing what's out there that he's well aware of, that he's worked with for the interim.
Yeah.
I got a question through the chair.
yes, sir.
When you have a transition, we're all well aware of what happens. Things get lost. People are commenting to the city manager. He's not there the next day, and nobody knows. If we're going to go with the interim, which like the city manager was saying, is probably a retiree or somebody's in transition, because the 6-month gig is not what they're looking for. But if they got something to fill in, or they're retired, and it's like a retired judge, they're coming back for a period of time and they're out. But somebody still has to oversee or feed the information to the interim. So Lisa is still going to have to be on, doing double duty, triple duty, however you want to call it, because there's going to be intricacies, policies, verbal agreements made or understandings with citizens or whatever that's not going to continue because, there's been a break in the person who's here. That, I think, needs to be looked at, too, because I think the biggest thing is we need consistency. We need to have the fact that if somebody's here, that somebody whispers in the ear of the whoever it is and says, this is what we've done in the past, or just so you know, because we all know that people elevate it to the city manager. I mean, there's no person here that handles like a complaint line and does it every day, day in and day out. It usually goes to the city manager. He gets back with them or sends a memo, blah, 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 and that's how it works. So the person doing it is namely him. So if he's gone, he's not going to be here, well, at that point in time. And if any kind of transition, you don't give somebody all the information, because most of it's in your head. You're not going to be able to write every little thing down and stuff like that. Where Lisa's been here. She's been in the staff meetings, she's been in the one-on-one, she's the second in command when Matt's gone, so on and so forth. So however we do it, I'd like to make sure that it's a smooth transition both ways, to the interim and from the interim to the permanent. I know there'll be some hiccups, but I mean, if you don't have that, you're going to have promises made or discussions happen. We're going to get into all this. Somebody went some way based on so-and-so who's gone. I mean, that's my concern. I think we need to look out for that and make sure there's a buffer in there, and that would be Lisa or somebody that would be in the decision-making process, so there'd be an overlap when the person's gone.
So whatever we do, we keep
So-
Lisa in the loop, is that?
Yes, that's what I was basically saying, yes.
Already started doing that.
It's not like you're dying though either.
No.
I don't think you're dying. The other thing I think through the chair, we need to talk about is the requirements and the salary and so on and so forth that, because when we go, and that's what the study session's for, are we going to keep the same agreement basically and just kind of maybe modify it based upon what the going rate is for a city manager, or how are we going to do that?
I would think that
that's-
I think that we go with what we have established, and then when
I'm
we,
asking.
when we find a candidate, and then we can do final negotiations with that person, and if that's not acceptable, then we may have to make some changes.
That's fair enough.
And I think, again, that's part of the process that you'll go through with the recruiting firm. I mean, again, if we do the selection right, they should be knowledgeable about the marketplace here in Michigan and what's out there. I mean, I think there's probably half a dozen recruitments going on in Michigan right now, and probably in southeastern Michigan, there's a few. So I think there's a number of companies that are actively doing those recruitments, so they're going to have a good idea. And again, that would be part of the RFP that we put together, is that they would work with you to do that. And
You remember when Matt came in, there was some decision that the salary wasn't
Yes.
where he needed to be, I believe, at that particular point, and it was through discussions then that it was adapted, and you ended up with the salary that you have. So that can work out.
To the chair, I just didn't know how far we were discussing this at this particular meeting. That's why I brought that up, because as we go down this, that's obviously going to be one of the issues that we have to discuss, or at least think about, because like Matt says, they're going to ask what's your ballpark figure, what are your terms, so that the candidate knows what they're basically bidding on and what they're going to do. And of course, and then it's subject to negotiations at the end. But I'd also like to say through the chair that I think the other recruiting firm that the emergency manager had was very good. We got some very talented people. Matt was one of them. They were fresh. They come in from outside the state. They had a fresh perspective based upon what their experience was. They were very competent, and they had a lot of credentials that really helped out. And I think that's what I'd like to see, is if we go with a recruiting firm similar to what we did before, or something that does that expands the recruitment, I guess is what I'm saying. Thank you.
The chair,
Yes, sir.
I have to agree with Councilman Kelsey and Councilwoman Breeding. I want somebody from out of state or something, because there's no way do I want anybody coming in from the city so they can't function their job properly. I think, like Matt, came from out of state. I think that's a very wise idea.
Through the chair, if I may, I'm kind of wondering how many assistant city managers are in the Metro Detroit area looking for a job full-time? I mean, my opinion is I'd rather have someone from Michigan potentially locally serving my city. That's how I would try to achieve this, and I don't know what the starting pay, or is it negotiable on the city manager, or is it a pay scale? Well, I don't know what the past was, if you want to enlighten me on that.
I think it was 125, was it
Through the
not?
chair, you're correct. It's 125 plus a car allowance and then the benefits. That's correct.
And some, so it's basic
Yes.
with that. And I'm sure that there are several assistants that are out there. And I'm sure that there are some that are just trying to get one for the first time. With our experiences with everything that's going on right now, where we're just coming off of emergency management and just getting things operating on a smooth level, I'd be hesitant to take a risk on somebody that is just untried in this. I think that Whereas, I mean, but then again, as we go through and have these people out there and they're viable candidates, and if we find out that we can let the company know that, this is a possibility that you may want to look at.
All right, one last question through the chair then. I remember last time when we interviewed for city manager, there was a couple other candidates that were viable, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, Matthew was chosen, so are those two names still in the hat somewhere?
There were two. There were two that were, that we interviewed. And it ended up being that we picked the first one. And he decided not to take the job for our benefit, actually, because Matt came through and did a marvelous job for us, so. So I don't know if that person he was from, I think, Ohio someplace, and decided to stay where he was at.
Thank you.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
I would be open to somebody who is local, but I want somebody with experience. I want somebody we're not going to be training somebody on this job. This is a job that, yes, we're out of, starting to be out of money difficulties, but we ain't there yet. And there's a lot that needs to be done in our city, and we need somebody with that backbone and back experience. And I wouldn't want to take somebody from inside the city, but I would be open to somebody in the area with the right experience.
I think that we all can agree that we want the best person for the job.
Yep.
On that.
Absolutely.
Okay, and this is not an easy job by any stretch of the imagination because of how we sit with staffing and the things that the city manager is required to do or he or she may not have to do in other communities. Can be more of a, person that would be directing the show as opposed to getting their hands dirty in the day-to-day operations.
Exactly.
Of things. But what we need to come to some type of an understanding whether it is that we want to go and do an RFP for the city manager position.
Yes.
I would say yes, through the chair.
Okay.
I think immediately.
That, yes, and this would be for the next meeting in August. Now, is there anything else that we need to start off with that, or is it preferably one with,
Yeah,
what am I saying is, do we want the interim to be part of the package that we put out for, or do the interim on a separate basis?
well, most likely, they're going to be providing you the same list of people that you could choose from.
Okay.
So it'd probably be less expensive.
Yeah,
So I think you should just.
more money for salaries.
Exactly.
Through the chair.
Put it all in one package then.
No. What I'm saying is that do two different.
Right, two different.
So,
Wasn't sure where
like I
you were
said, we could start tomorrow. I can provide you some of the resumes of people that are available that would do a good job. Have experience and can do the job for you. And you could look at those, and if you don't like any of those, we can put something out really quick. I mean, I don't know in terms of really doing a vast search for an interim. I mean, you're probably not going to get someone from out of state because they'd be picking up and moving here for that period of time, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense. But again, I think there are some former managers that would probably do a good job.
Okay, so, but you can get started
Yep.
on finding your replacement, I guess, is what you'd start with that process, and we'll have that for the next meeting. In the meantime, do you have some information on some candidates for the,
Interim.
Interim.
Through the chair.
yes, sir.
I would also like experience, not somebody just out of school. So that should be part of the thing. How many years' experience do we decide on?
Well, as
We can
part of the-
decide that later, but
Yeah, as part of the process, when they did it in the past, when the last search that we had, they sat down with individual council members, the mayor, and everyone, is what are you looking for, what attributes, what things are you looking for as far as the city manager goes? I would imagine that process is going to be pretty similar. So I would think that your suggestions will be heard at that time also. as all of ours. All right, so I think we are in agreement for that, and we have another meeting starting in about 3 minutes. So I'll entertain a motion to, no, we won't entertain a motion. We'll just
We will just adjourn.
adjourn at 6:28.
Thank you.
Oh, Tom? Did you know Paul Syracuse passed away?
Former city worker.
He started in Parks and he was retired from the fire department.
I have to go get ready for May.
That was a good guy.
Been saying that a lot. It seems like almost once a month someone's passing away.
Well, they're bitching about the retirements, but you know, we're losing them left and right. You know,
3 shows tonight.
Yeah, 3 shows and
I'm
what do they call it? A
well, there's a few
presentation.
that are younger, but I mean,
Overall,
Everything is, what's,
30s.
really.
Thank you
So
for
they're
your service.
bitching about this retirement so much, but you know what? In 5 years, you're not going to have
send that email tomorrow.
volume of personnel. You gotta pay for it.
That we were under the
So as your
arm.
volume shrinks, I mean, here these people are trying to screw you even more.
Got us
Let's
through
screw it.
that whole process. and
I'm retired from my
We're
retirement.
fairly firm
wanna come in and
focused right now, give or take a
If you
crisis or two.
don't work all your life,
done a
and
good
pay
job.
taxes or anything like that, or
I'm sure
you're
that,
illegal or
you're
whatever,
doing a marvelous
they give
job
you
for St. Clair
insurance.
Shores.
They give everything. I mean, my buddy was a rough and never paid Social Security. I took him down. He got medical insurance and eyeglass, and you know, it's like he had better insurance than I did. So it's like bullshit. If there's nothing there, then there's nothing there. Period.
Much better in color.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I looked at that and I thought, did I miss something? I got that one. I'm going, maybe I've come back from vacation, I'm a little punchy, but I'm thinking, what the heck happened, you know?
You used to enjoy, some of the old television shows, and they hit you with color, and it was all better.
Presentation.
I gotta start another meeting.
We interviewed Kibbe before.
Okay, I didn't. We did the Pledge of Allegiance, we should do it again. When? Why not?
What the hell? It's a new meeting.
I understand is one.
All right,
Interested. There's one fairly
if I could have the camera back again, please. I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you. You're all right. Okay. We'll call a study session to order at, we'll go at 6:30. If everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, if we could have roll call, please.
Sir. Councilpersons Breeding,
Present.
Higgins,
Here.
Kelsey,
Here.
Parkinson,
Here.
Ross. Here. Salcido.
Here.
And Mayor Carnes.
Here. Good evening, everyone. What we have on board now is a study session to where we're looking over the police courthouse project for the 25th District Court and the City of Lincoln Park Police Department. We have Mr. Copler, who is ready to go forward, I guess that you are.
Yes, first off, there is no public threat here at this council meeting, if you're wondering about. I started worrying when the dog showed up, though.
Well, and as an overview, there's several years ago, and I can't remember how long it has been, Your Honor. It's been 3 or 4 years. You realized the fact that the court could not fit into their current facilities, and it's been Judge Clifton's belief since that time that it also would be a good time for the police department to be redone. Our current police department was built in 1952. It was state-of-the-art in 1952. I still say 52, but it's all right. Close. Anyway, it was state-of-the-art in the early 50s when it was built and put in, but that is no longer the case for this. And you have different requirements for the officers and different needs. And as far as housing of prisoners and anything, is far behind the times. And having to operate in that facility, that they've been doing an exceptional job for us. And on the onset of this, I have to say that through all of this, with this building that they're in, and I know firsthand how bad it was 7 years ago, and I don't think it's gotten any better since that particular time. They continue to do an outstanding job for us as far as enforcing all of our ordinances, writing violations, and as you will see, I think that Mr. Koppel will touch on the budget, and if not, I suggest that you look at that and to see how the court has been able to provide more to us than what was in that we anticipated the revenue. And that goes all down to the officers that are working for you, the amount of work and production that they're doing. And this is through the times when we had their pay was cut, the amount of time that they worked, the amount of officers to do the job, and through all of that, they've been over and above in production and in service to their citizens. So I wanted to say that on the onset. Mr. Koppel, go ahead.
Can I stipulate to everything you said, and we'll just move on? So I wanted to make a couple opening comments, very similar to what Mayor Carnes just did, so it's going to be a little bit redundant, so I'll try to change it. This has been a project that I know probably started before I got here. When I arrived, they were just finishing up the original study that the court had done to look at their building. And as a side lot to that, they also went in and looked at the city police department as well. And the report comes back basically saying that both are not in the condition they should be in to serve the current and future needs of both the 25th District Court and the Lincoln Park Police Department. Again, something that we already knew, right? I mean, just walk through there and you can see it. You know, look at how much time we spend in those buildings maintenance-wise, and you understand that there is a big need within those buildings. Through that, again, with the leadership of the Chief Judge of the 25th District Court, the Chief of Police, the Mayor, and of Council, we started putting together some consideration for what needed to be done. And actually, if we kind of move into what the agenda is, you know, we're going to talk about what's happened thus far, the police department building program, the costs, locations, how can the city pay for this, the need to act, and then we'll open it up to questions to start that conversation. What has happened thus far? So after that study that said, you know, we need to do something, the court then formed the building committee, which is made up of representatives of E-Course, River Rouge, and the city of Lincoln Park, as well as themselves. And they also, if you remember, came and spoke to the mayor and council about beginning to charge a $20 building fee on the cases. And that was, in fact, acted upon and is sitting there accruing money that's going to help ultimately to pay for the court portion of this project. To move the court and police department concept forward, we were able to get a CGAP grant through the state treasury. It was a $40,000 grant where we were able to bring on Redstone Architects to start looking at that initial study and then taking it the next step, which then looked at what are the actual space requirements, where can we put this, what are the needs to go into those buildings, and then more importantly also what the costs would be for us to move forward. That feasibility study was presented to mayor and council, I think late last year, early this year. And then right afterwards, one of the locations that was discussed was Quant Park. Mayor and council had a study session to discuss that. And the feeling that came out of that was Quant Park wasn't a viable site based upon your feelings of that location. We then went back and started looking at some other sites within the city. There was a little bit of miscommunication, I think, from the other communities about what they were willing, or the area they were willing to look at. But now I'll get into the locations. But we have developed another alternative that ultimately the building committee feels is probably the best site to accommodate all the different communities. And then something more recently, the 25th District Court and the three cities and their police departments have worked out a plan to help pay for both the court and police construction costs. Unfortunately for the city of Lincoln Park, it doesn't pay for all the construction costs, but it does put a dent into it, and we'll get into that in a little bit as part of this presentation. But I just want to say that on the onset, that this presentation is about the police department. It's not about the court. I think based upon the financials that I see the court is collecting, they should be able to pay for this in-house without coming back to the communities asking for additional money. Now, there's a lot of factors in that. If there is a big boom in construction and construction costs go up 30%, well, all bets are off. But I think as we sit here today, they're going to be generating with the change in their revenue that we've decided to go forward with. They're going to be able to retire about $1 million worth of debt a year. And that's far above what we're anticipating the debt requirement for that would be. So I think this presentation doesn't go there. We don't talk about the court, but it's hard to separate the court from the police because that really is the linchpin that brings us to this discussion, is that there is an opportunity that we can reduce the cost to build a new police department by joining with the court. And that's what makes it even partially doable for the city, is the fact that the court is moving forward with a project. So again, some of this I just stole from the report that you should have seen. When they did the program needs, space needs, they show that the police department is looking not exterior but interior, needing about 42,000 square foot. And we have right now about how many square feet? 19,000. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is what, based upon the industry standards for space per person and for the needs of each of the different operations within the police department, that the architect says is a minimum that we should have to build into the program. And this would take us well into the future. You also remember this slide from that presentation. I know some of you were shocked probably on that, but the estimates for a mid-19 bid projection, which by the way is not going to happen if you haven't figured it out, was about 14.7. Mid-2020 bid projection, which I will grant you that won't happen again, is upwards of 15.5. But I think there are things that can be done to reduce that cost. But we won't know that until we get into the actual schematics, which is the next phase, which, by the way, we have a grant through Treasury to pay for the schematics, which was the Financially Distressed Cities, Villages, and Township grant that we received. So these are the kind of the numbers that I use then going forward, looking at the costs and saying, okay, the high is 15.8. Low is 13.5, because I think those are probably going to be the range that we ultimately see. Of course, if, again, there is a large boom in construction and it's hard to get contractors, all bets are off. But I think this right now, looking at where we're standing, makes sense in my mind in terms of what those costs would be. And so I just did really easy analysis here, looking at it and saying, okay, if we went out, sold a bond, 30-year bond, 4% interest rate, what's our annual cost? Approximately $913,000 for the high end, $780 per year at the low end. Again, it's going to be off by, maybe 5 or 6%, but pretty good numbers there. Interest paid on that, because again, you're never, when you're doing these projects, you're never just paying, unfortunately, for the principal, you're also paying interest. And so 4% interest for 30 years on a $15.8 million is going to be about $11.6 million. And for a $13.5 million project, 4% over 30 years is about $9 million. So in total, you're spending about $27 million for the high end and about $23 for the low end. So we'll come back to that. We're going to get there. But you might remember that we did, as part of the initial study, look at 3 different sites in the city. The number 1 site was Quant Park, which is right over here. The number 2 site was the Vibra Hospital. And the number 3 site is the Grand Saukwa property off of Dick Street. Based upon cost assumptions for acquisition, cost assumptions for demolition and site prep, Quant Park made the most sense because it was going to be the least expensive of the 3. After we got the impression that Quant Park wasn't on the table, we did look at 2 additional sites. And site 4 is down here, which is the south side of the Emmons Street, or south of Emmons, which is the Lincoln Park Plaza. And then we looked at a site in the downtown. Based upon the feelings of the other communities, joint communities, the belief was the Emmons Street site was going to be too far away for their residents, and so they really didn't want to consider that. And so the building committee then started focusing on a downtown site. And there's a number of issues that we'd have to confront in terms of the space, but we do believe that we can build both a court and a police department and have the necessary parking to accommodate that. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of time where Judge Clifton can also speak about his viewpoint on that and maybe get into a little bit of their commitment to that site. So we think we have a viable site. So how can we pay for this? Because that really, in the end, is the trick, right? We have the debt capacity to do whatever we want to do, but debt capacity is not the issue. It's, do you have the funding capacity to pay for the debt when you get into it? I reran the 5-year budget, and it's very clear that we don't have $700,000 to $900,000 of capacity within the general fund in 3 years to do this project. So then take a step back and say, well, we could redo the cost structure of the general fund, and we could look at trying to reduce the amount of money necessary to pay for it. Because I think one of the things that we really need to be is conservative. And before we start this project, we have to be committed to funding it. We don't want to all of a sudden say, ooh, now we have $800,000 we have to come up with. I mean, if you can't lock in the money to pay for it now, you shouldn't do it, because that's a recipe for disaster. So we have to figure out a way to do it. Reducing, or redoing the cost structure in the general fund, you could do it. You're going to be cutting out a number of programs that I don't know if it makes sense to do that for the rest of the city. But it is something that you could look at, I'm saying. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is something you could look at. The next option that we would have is the Headley override. So, we can go up to 20 mills, but we'd have to do a Headley override, which is going out to the voters to raise it back up to 20 mills. We currently are 1.094 mills below the 20 mills. I'll get into some of the financial numbers here in a second when we look at that program. But that is, again, one option to lock in money to pay for this. So again, going forward, you're going to have money to actually get this project done, and it's not going to reduce you in a panic to try to do something that you don't want to do. The third way is a bond issuance, and I'm going to liken this to the road bond. And it would be very similar. You'd go out to the voters again. You would say that we're going to do this project. It's going to cost X amount. And over the period of time to retire that debt, a tax will be levied on the residents. So it's just like how you did the road bond. It'll be a little bit different because the terms are going to be different. It's not going to be retiring it over 10 years. And so there's some nuances that are going to be different. But it's going to be very similar to doing that. Now, both the Headley and the bond issuance are guaranteed ways to lock in the ability to afford this project. And again, I think that is the thing that you need to do, is lock in so you can afford to do this project. Wanted to talk about the, what the 25th District Court, working with the police departments, have done. Effectively, they have changed the way that the tickets are going to be handled in such that it's going to create revenue. Instead of going to the state of Michigan, it's going to be coming back to the court and to the municipalities. And in running a wide range of numbers, and again, I'm going to throw some caveats because, the numbers are only good as the information you have, and there's other elements of the information that if I had would probably make my numbers really good. But in exchange for that, I've made some very conservative estimates to this. And so where I say there it's between 160 to 200, if you look just at the numbers, it's well above 250,000 a year. But I started putting a lot of different assumptions onto that reduced it down because, again, I would rather be too low in the estimate and come in too high in actual than give you a really rosy picture and then, 2 years from now you're staring at, well, we have $500,000 we have to come up with. What happened? So I think there is potential for more, but very conservatively, we're looking at about $160,000 to $200,000. And I picked a number in between there, saying, okay, this is, again, a conservative number to use of $180,000. So if you go back to what those annual cost projections were I gave you, the $913 and the $780, subtract out the $180,000, that means that we have a shortfall that we'd have to be able to find $733,000 approximately at the high end and $600,000 at the low end. So again, ignoring the first idea, which is restructuring the general fund, looking at a Headley override. So we know that 1.094 mills produces today $596,348. So again, applying that then to what our shortfall was, we see that under the high estimate, we're still short $137,567, and under the low estimate, we're $4,000 short. So in either of those scenarios with the Headley, there's probably going to have to be some tinkering with the general fund to come up with that additional money. Obviously, at the low end, it's a lot less. At the high end, it's a lot more. And let me just say at this point, one of the things that I didn't even take into consideration that we have to keep in mind is that the state of Michigan, through the Treasury, is very interested in this project. And they have already put over $400,000 into this project. And I think there's potential to get more money from them. Another thought to keep in mind is that if you ever look at the state budget, and I know you probably all read the state budget, right? And I can't remember exactly what the term that they use, but there is a section in the state budget where it's towards the end, middle end, I guess. But there's a lot of money going to a lot of cities, counties, and townships in the state of Michigan for projects just like this. A couple $1 million here, a few $1 million there. Those things are what we need to be reaching out to our representatives because do you know what committee Representative Clementi's on by chance? Yes, and what does Finance Committee do? That's right. And so I believe, the senator that represents Ecorse is on the Senate's Finance Committee. So there are people in positions where you can make a very good presentation to help get additional money to do these things. So again, I'm not taking that in consideration, but that will be work that could be done, should be done to help fund this and make this happen, which then would reduce the impact on the residents. So again, off the soapbox. So what does this mean to the residents then? So real quick, looking at taxable value of 25,000, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70,000, you see that the annual cost of that Headley override is going to have an impact of anywhere from $27.35 a year down to up to $76.58 a year. The majority of the properties are going to be in that taxable value of 25 to 40,000. So the building bond. So the building bond's a little bit cleaner on this because, what is left to be funded after the core revenue is taken off is what would be assessed to the properties. And so at the high end, that millage requirement, again, in today's numbers, would be about 1.34 mils, and at the low end, 1.10 mil. And both of these understand that over time, those numbers are probably going to, the dollar amounts are going to increase because you're going to have the taxable value increase over time. So these will go up a little bit. It could, depending upon how everything is split up, it could have a little bit of a reduction on the building bond impact to the residents. But again, I went with the more conservative and said this is what it is right now. And what it would look like. And so for residents going through a building bond, we would be on the high end, again, using the 25, 30, 40, 50, 60, $70,000 taxable values, anywhere from $3,350 up to $9,380. On the low end, anywhere from $2,750 up to $77 a year. I think the building bond is probably the best way to go because it locks in the money for it. You're not, competing with other interest where doing a Headley, a future council could say, well, we're going to use this money for something else. And then you'd be stuck trying to figure out how to retire the debt. But I think this is probably the better way to go about it. But again, ultimately, that's going to be your choice if you go forward. Before I have the chief come up and kind of do a presentation of what the existing conditions are, just so we all understand what we're trying to change here. The building was built in 1955 and really has very limited capital investment since its construction. It has a lot of needs. Won't go over all these. We've already done work on the roof. We've done some work to the HVAC, but there's still a lot more to do with that, unfortunately. And again, I'll leave the total impact of that to the chief to go through. But I do want to get into the size piece of it. And when you think about 1955, what the police department looked like and what the police department was doing in 1955 versus what it looks like today and what it's doing today, those are two different centuries, but also two different concepts. There is a lot more need for space in the type of police operations that we're doing, and I think that if we are committed to, one, keeping our police department the top of the police departments here in the downriver, I think a commitment to giving them a place to do their work is very important as well, and being able to do it successfully. Although we don't want necessarily to be a guest of theirs, that does happen, and it happens to good people sometimes. And even those accommodations are not where they should be. And I think we do need to look at that and understand that even if you don't move forward with a new police facility, you have to spend money. And money will be generated to do something, but it has to be spent because I think, we've let it get too far out of where it should be, unfortunately. And again, I want to go back to that space again here. It's 19,000 is where we're at, proposed at 42,000. I mean, we're nearly 2.5 times smaller than what the industry standards, according to the architect, says we should be at. And I think picture where you're sitting right now, 2.5 times smaller. And you still have to do your work. You still have to sit there for the 4 hours that you're sitting there. And that, I think, kind of brings home what being in a too small of a building really means.
There was an addition put on the building. Circa early 70s, but still, that section where the Detective Bureau is now, but that's getting to 50 years old, too.
70, is that right? I have to fact check you. But I'm going to turn it over to Chief Waters here to kind of go through the condition of the building.
So most of you have been through the building, you've seen it. Some of these pictures don't do it justice. If you actually walk through, you'll see it. You'll be disgusted by the condition of it. So right off the bat, the security of the building, we have numerous people that pull behind our building every day. It's posted, the DPS was good enough to post signs all over it, but there's no security fence around it. We've had people break into our cars. They've gone and stolen evidence and things from behind our station. We need a secure lot. Just on top, more than just losing things, it's not safe for the officers. And you'll see that there's, just like I said, here's our station, here's one of the sides. There's absolutely no fencing. Anybody can walk up and ambush any of our officers or go through any of their cars. Same with this picture. And the west side of the lot's the same way. When the prisoners are released, they come through that door. If they look to their left, that's our command desk. There's nothing that separates them in between anything else. They walk through that hallway. They go to the right, they're walking right into our records bureau. So we need a secure area so that we can process prisoners, release people. Even when the people leave, sometimes they're not happy. So we need a more secure spot to do that. And here's the picture right here. So when they're coming across, when they look to their left, that's our command desk. They're looking right at our command officers. Our records department's very small and outdated. We have numerous file cabinets full of boxes that are stored all over the station. We also keep computer servers in a small workspace. This makes working conditions very difficult for the employees that work back there. You can see that we use every bit of space we can. There's arrest jackets that are just piled up all through records. And that's our server room there. So there's a lot of spaghetti there. Hallway there, storage area for paper. That's actually pretty low. We got paper and we got cages for animals and it's stored in our hallway there because there's nowhere else to put them. Our bathrooms, we have 3 bathrooms that are completely outdated, falling apart. DPS has been very generous to come out and try to repair and do whatever they can. They've put numerous Band-Aids on them, but that's where my men, that's where they use the facility, so that's disgusting. It's not that it's not cleaned, it's just that it's old and it's falling apart. That's the ceiling. That's the women's bathroom, it's the same condition. That's our bathroom in the west side of the station by the DB area. The rear of the station, our carport behind the station is a nesting area for birds. The car's walls enters the station, it's constantly covered with bird feces. The prisoner receiving area where officers were to pull in to Sally Port, shut the garage door, get the bad guy out. It's too narrow. It's too small. The county doesn't even pull in there anymore because they can't fit their truck in there, their van. And you can see there's the Sally Port or the garage carport. There's nesting there. It's not a lack of cleaning. We try to knock it down and get it power washed as much as possible, but as soon as we get rid of them, they come back. That's the prisoner receiving garage. It's a very tiny, narrow area to pull into, and it needs to be a bigger spot so officers can be secure. Pull in there, get their prisoner out, shut the garage, put their weapon away, and then get the bad guy out. Our west side of the station, detectives, their offices are too small. We don't have enough office space for them. When all our detectives are in, meaning our school resource officers, because of the small space and open walls, it becomes difficult to interview people, especially the people that need special attention. We have to share office space. Some of the detectives use the same desk. The garage where the detectives work, process evidence, has become more of a storage area for large pieces of evidence, and it's also just like a go-to spot to store different boxes and whatnot in there. The flooring in the hallway of the west side of the station is completely falling apart. Tiles are actually popping up and becoming a tripping hazard. And you'll see, so the walls don't go all the way to the ceiling. So if you have a complainant in your office and you're speaking with them, people can hear from over the top. There's no insulation in the walls. You can hear all the way down the other end of the hallway when people are talking. This is our DB garage where evidence should be processed, but because of the amount of space we have to store things, it's kind of been a go-to of just storage. This is our conference room. This is turned into an interview room, an area where we burn DVDs, a lunchroom, and any other planning area that we have that's all used in that specific area. Now that actually looks bigger than what it is. If I were to pull one of those chairs out, it would hit the back wall. The back walls are all marked up because as soon as you pull the chair, you're hitting the wall. It's how narrow that space is. Our detective space, they, like I said, we have 2 to an office, and we have some detectives that have to share the same desk. And as you can see, if you had to bring a complainant in there to speak with them, there's not enough space for them to tell their story. And sometimes their story isn't the greatest. Here's our flooring. As you can see, the floor is bowed out. We've had this fixed before and retiled, but it's just kind of popping back up, become a trip hazard. Our locker room is too small. Officers are forced to store all their gear not only in their locker, but on top of the lockers. You can see in this picture here, there's all kinds of bags on top of the lockers. There's just not enough space inside. Our jail cells, the floors in the cells are chipping and cause a hazard. The cell doors are constantly malfunctioning because of their age, and they become more difficult to repair. The detention officer office where prisoners are printed and pictured is too small, has caused issues with prisoners that are not cooperative. Believe it or not, sometimes when people come, they don't want to be with us. The ceiling in detention office also needs to be replaced. Here's our flooring. This is an example of where the epoxy is chipped up and become a hazard. This is one of our cells that's currently, we're in the process of getting fixed. This is a cell door. You can see they're very big, thick. It's not like we could go to Home Depot and buy a new door. When these break down, it becomes quite a task for DPS to figure out how to fix them. Our detention office, as I explained, it's a very narrow, small space. People do have to be printed and pictured, and when they're not cooperative, there's not a whole lot of spinning around time in there. This is the detention office kitchen. Food is stored there for the prisoners, and blankets. Again, not a whole lot of space in there, but we make do with what we have. Here's the ceiling in the detention office. It's ruined from the water, the leakage that we'd had prior to getting roof fixed. Our booking room needs new floor. Current floor is chipping, causing a hazard. Kind of hard to see in that picture, but you can see better there where the epoxy's pulled, chipped away. The door there is pulling away. Basement and station. We have a 3-lane gun range that needs to be replaced. The ventilation system's not working. We just recently qualified our new officer, and when we were done qualifying him, it looked like a fog. There was so much smoke in there, you couldn't see through. But we had to qualify him. We finished. The backstop is bent. It's been bent for a few years now. If you were to shoot a regular round at that, it would ricochet back. It was actually coming back at officers. The targets, the 3 targets that we have no longer work. We have to manually move them back and forth. And the pipes above the range, some are waste for the jail cells, they leak onto the range. The walls also leak when it rains, and as you'll see here shortly, you'll see the water stains throughout the floor. This is our 3-lane range. Those 3 targets, as I said, don't work, and they're moved manually by the officers. Some of the piping that leaks, I just noticed some new spots where it's leaking right onto the floor. It's a large task there to replace. Again, it's not something that we can just go up and run up to Home Depot and grab some new stuff. It's going to be quite a task to replace all that. This is probably not the greatest picture, but this is the side view of the range, the backstop. You can see where it's pulled away from the backstop is actually peeling back, where rounds you can see have started to ricochet back. You can see the water stains on the floor where the water has leaked. It's either come up from the drain or is leaked through the walls and stained the floor. Flooring in the ceilings throughout the station need to be replaced. The floors are a mismatch of tiles, and they're a tripping hazard. Ceilings are also a mismatch of colors and brands, and they have water damage all over throughout the station. You know, there's just an example. We just recently had some of the tiles fixed. That white one was just fixed just a few months ago. But, you know, we're not trying to be picky, as you can see. We needed to be fixed. But this isn't, you know, if this was a business, somebody would put it up for sale and get rid of it. Here's our typical office ceiling in the write-up room where the officers come in to do the reports. This is what they have to look at every day when they do their roll call. Our evidence room's too small, it's overcrowded, making it difficult to store evidence. It's located in an old garage. It's poorly heated and cooled. You can see that's pretty maxed out there. These are just a few examples of the condition of the police department. And, you know, as I offered all of you, if anyone would like to take a tour, don't hesitate, let me know, and I can make that arrangement. But thank you for your time.
So I'm just going to skip through to questions. I don't know if
I'd
you're.
like to bring Judge Whitson
Yeah.
up first for a couple minutes. I'd like to leave at least 10 minutes for questions.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. I will try to be very brief in my comments. Let me just start by saying I'm very appreciative of the efforts Mr. Koppler has made in this presentation tonight. He did an excellent job and just exemplifies the fact that we're going to truly miss him when he is gone. And on behalf of the court, I would just say the court is 1,000% behind Chief Waters and the request for a joint police and court facility. There are so many reasons why that is a good idea. It's hard to know where to start. How about, I think we're all familiar with the tragedies in California and most recently in Dayton. It is a different world out there, and if we truly care about our citizens of this city and truly care about their safety, our police need a better, more efficient, more up-to-date, technology-wise facility that's going to allow them to continue to do the great job that they have been doing for many years, despite the poor conditions that they have to experience. I couldn't be more proud of our police force for what they do under the circumstances. I think you're all recall we had not too long ago, a incident at the court where we had a couple prisoners escape briefly. That would not happen with a joint police court facility because all that would be in-house. They would not be exposed to the public like they are now. If we build a new court building and we don't build a new police building, it is going to create havoc for our police and citizens. Right now, because the court is so close, our court officers typically walk prisoners over to the Lincoln Park Police to save taking officers off the street to do that. If the court is located to another place, that's no longer going to be possible, so now we're going to be taking officers off the street for the purpose of coming to the court and picking them up and transporting them to the police station, where they can be in turn picked up by the county. That's the way it works. You're creating safety issues by doing that, more opportunities for people to get away. Speaking of safety issues, the existing conditions at the police department, I respectfully submit, are just a time bomb waiting for somebody to have some bad situation in a cell where it's going to result in a lawsuit against the city because we're all aware of the condition, and if nothing is done, now you're going to be spending that $15 million on attorney fees and, a possible case against the city for improper conditions. So there are a plethora of reasons. Right now, our officers are busting their butt to write tickets. That can only last so long, ladies and gentlemen. We're all humans, and if at some point they don't get a more appropriate setting that they're entitled to, at some point, officers, just like all of us, are just going to lose that motivation to get out there and protect our city and write tickets, which, by the way, the court, thanks to those officers, is generating in excess of $2 million a year for this city. Now, if those officers aren't writing as many tickets, that revenue is going to go down significantly. So I, again, would reiterate the court is I'll say 2,000% behind this, because it is absolute necessity to have this joint facility, and we can do it. And our citizens, I think, deserve it, and they will recognize and agree that we're talking about public safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. And there's Matt.
Questions?
Well, at the time that we're going into this, there are certain things that the police department and the court will share that makes our cost for the police department less than it would be if we were to go out and do the police department all on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And with the funding things that are in place, we were talking about $100 a year for an average house or something similar along those lines. If we were to do the whole 15 million, it would be far more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, through the aid of the state with the 440,000 that they've committed, the advance work that has been done by the court and by the officers, then our cost is substantially lower.
Yeah.
And this is basically a one-time opportunity for us to take advantage of this. Now, in the end, it's going to be up to our citizens whether they determine this is necessary or not, because it's going to require a vote for whether you do the bond issue or whether you do the Headley override. It's going to require the citizens to give their approval on that. Right? So in the end, it's going to be up to our citizens to decide if that moves forward. So Donna?
Yeah.
I just have a question to Matt.
Yeah,
through
go
the
ahead.
chair. You said on the bond, we would probably be able to float these bonds at 4% interest on the bonds. Where are you coming up with that, since we're not really at the top of our bond rating yet?
Well, I think, again, if you look at where we're at right now with even the private placement that we did, we were, was it 3.5% around there, I think it was? No. I mean, it came in a lot better. And I think, again, we're at the point where any day now, S&P should be contacting us to do their 2-year review. And even if that doesn't happen, it was our intent that with the next selling of the bonds for the road program, that we would actually go and get it rated. And I think, again, we have met every condition that S&P put out there to get us back into investor grade rating. We're not going to be AAA, but I think, we're going to be investor grade, and we'd be looking at, 3.5% for that rate.
When is the deadline for us to get this on this year's ballot? Haven't we crossed that threshold?
For November, yes.
Yeah.
For November, yes, but there's going to be a March ballot,
Right.
and we can get it on the March ballot. I believe the deadline is the beginning of December, late
Yeah.
November.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'd have to have that before.
Or if you
that to
wanted, you
get
could do
to
it in
the
May,
Governor and.
or then in November. So you have a few different chances next year to get it before the public if you wanted to.
Through the chair, Mr. Kaplan, I know you mentioned there may be some help statewide. What about Ecorse and River Rouge? Is there any money coming in from them two cities to help with the money?
Well, not for the city police department, but for the court, that's kind of, the way that the court is ultimately going to pay for this is through their building fee and that change that the court's making with the police departments. So that's going to generate, like I said, upwards of $1 million on the conservative side, probably up to $1.3 million. So they, unless there's, again, a dramatic change in the environment for bidding, I think they're going to be able not only to afford retiring whatever that debt's going to be, but also be able to put money away for, maintenance and improvements.
Comment? I just want to thank you for all the pictures. I think seeing it is definitely much better than just trying to describe it. But one thing that the pictures don't tell is the smell. There's several of those rooms that have a smell to them that is not pretty. So I don't think the ventilation problem is just to the basement.
Right.
It's throughout the building. So I thank our officers for enduring what they do. That is amazing.
Anyone else? Or
Yeah, just through the chair, two questions for Matt. I see the Lincoln Park police space needs go from 59 to 88. Where's the money coming out for that if and when we build this police department? Where are we getting the 29 extra officers or police to fund that? I
Well,
mean, it's going to have,
yeah.
if we go ahead, it shows we're going to have to, the
Yeah.
bond goes, but that's not going to cover the manpower. That's one of the questions I have.
Right, and so again, what we're looking at is not what the operations look like today, but 20 and 30 years down the road, because we want to make sure that we build this for the future.
Okay, so that's not like.
Yeah, there is not, as far as I know, there isn't a budget request for 20 or 30 more officers. I think that would be a good thing if we could do that, but I think, if you kind of look over the next 20 to 30 years, we know that there's going to be some additional requirements, because hopefully we're successful in what we're doing, and the city's going to be growing, and we're going to be needing more officers to provide that public safety.
No, I agree with you. I think that would be, I was just curious. It just.
Yeah,
didn't
and I think that's also a mistake that a lot of places build into their building where they're at today, and not 20 and 30 years down the road. And you've probably heard that story many times that, they were at capacity as soon as they moved in. And I think, again, that's what we're trying to prevent that from happening.
Well, that's good through the chair, because I know maintenance, obviously, nobody touched this building since 55. There's been a lot of people sitting up here and a lot of people going through the city, and nobody touched the building. That's amazing to me. That's absolutely, I don't care what kind of building, it's just absolutely amazing. Nobody come up with, you can see from the building, it just didn't happen yesterday. This is issues that were going on for a long time. I would hope the new building has a maintenance budget built into it so that it can maintain itself regardless of what happens.
Yeah.
The last question I got is on your process budgeting, and the third bullet point is, projections do not include cost of land acquisition, nor do they include costs related directly to specific site, such as special stormwater retention issues, utilities. So we don't have the final cost yet, because that's just for the building, not for the land or the other stuff.
So what I did when I got to my costs there, somewhere here, I actually did factor in what I think those numbers are going to be for that site. And again, understanding that when Redstone put their budget together, they did a very conservative number as well. Again, they're trying not to be too low, so again, to surprise you. So I think, in talking with them about what the current construction costs are, I've looked around to see what other communities are getting into the construction, either for a court or a police department. They're a little bit high, and so I started reducing that, and then, looking at, again, the low being a optimistic number, the high being a little bit or very conservative. The number's probably somewhere in between those when all is said and done, minus the possibility that we have a bid environment where, it's going to be a tight bid and a lot of people are bidding a lot higher. Because again, I've been in times where the economy is so booming that construction costs are 30 to 40% above what estimates are. And I've also been lucky to go out to bid when the economy is not good and construction costs are 20 to 30% below. So it's going to depend upon when you go out into the market to do that project.
Through the chair, I agree with you, because that's just the way it goes. It's
Yep.
happened where I come from. Very nice presentation. I think everybody watching this at home should watch it and have their neighbors watch it, because when the discussion comes up, I'm sure for the ballot, I hope they answer their own questions. That's the whole idea of having these study sessions, so all this information is presented to everybody. Everybody did a nice job. The Judge Clifton and Chief Waters and yourself was very nice. Thank you. I'm all set. Thank you. That's the only two questions I have.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
we also need to bring up these citizens, all the social media that I watch, they think that the $60 million that the school got is for the city. So we need to remind the citizens that that's the school. The school's had bond issues continually since I've been around. City Hall, what's this building here, built in the 30s? I mean, 25? Okay. I mean, we need a lot of work around here. And just because they think that this $60 million went to the city, no, it didn't. The city recognizes, or gets none of that money whatsoever. So, take good care of your schools, but let your city hall and fire department fall down.
And if I could just real quick on top of that, the city has a tremendous amount of need as it comes to its facilities. And it's not that we're coming forward with a $100 million project to fix all those things at once. I think, like City Hall, we're able to spend a little bit of money to keep it at least somewhat operational. We're really beyond the point with the police department where we can spend money and not be throwing money away. It really is in such a desperate need of a lot of work that spending a little, again, what we spend is probably not going to be recoverable when all is said and done.
Well, there's some areas that had a lot of preventive maintenance. City Hall is one of them. But there's a lot of buildings that there's no preventive maintenance. Fix it when it breaks. So we need to also start a building program for maintenance. Anything you can do preventive is going to save you about a quarter of the cost of what's going to be in repairs. Thank you.
Okay, well, I want to give us a couple minutes before the start of the next meeting, so the study session will be adjourned. It will go 7:26. Thank you, Mr. Koppler, Judge Clifton, Chief, all the officers, everyone from the court in attendance. Perfect timing. Is Pastor Dragonic here?
Why should I wait Well, the police car took them right there to the house. So what? It seems to be more central. The needs, I'm sorry for that, people. You know what? This is like the talking about the buildings in our city. We need to figure out. Fine. If they don't want to come to our city, then don't get in trouble. No. 20 minutes. Oh, maybe 20 minutes.
Saturday, I realized
That's gonna
my
come
trash
back.
can uses out more than I do, but I don't care
Look at
because
that,
I'm
five
happy
hundred
at
there,
home.
I'm sure you can more. 4 cars.
I'm glad you just had one. Glad you just had the one today.
If you ever look at social media, they complain about the city not doing roads and all that stuff, the next thing out of their mouth is, well, we just approved $60 million for the city. No, we didn't. Exactly, it's gonna be run.
You're still, they're voting on the contract tonight, so it'll either be official or won't be official tomorrow. Thank you very much. Just me.
Hi.
I'm Reggie Lee with Fiber House.
Hi.
Hi. We got a quick.
Do ya? That Viber Hospital doing something that I don't know about tonight?
What are we doing? No, no, that's all right. Yeah.
Update on the campus. Yeah. Shut down the inpatient unit. Campus is available for opportunities. Just want to spend a couple minutes to talk about it.
What's your name, sir?
Reggie Lee?
And you're with Fiber Hospital?
Yes, I'm the CEO.
Well, sure, leave it here, and then
There you go. That's all I need.
then we'll just leave me those, and then we'll get started from there. Okay, well, that's all right, Reggie. I just wasn't aware that it was working today. Okay, well, and it may be summertime. One, two, three, four, five. We'd like to get started as soon as possible here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Fiber Hospital, come over. Okay. When?
When I said it was over.
Okay. Away we go.
I don't know, is this a new one? I thought we had one in our
All right,
packet.
we won't worry about that. We have a camera back, please.
Maybe not. Yeah, we got one. Must be an updated one.
Should those screens be going through or is not? There we go. Good evening, everyone. We'll call the Lincoln Park City Council meeting to order of August 5th, 2019. If everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be immediately followed by the invocation by Pastor Frank Draganic of Harvest Church of the Nazarene. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's pray. So Lord, we ask that you bless this meeting tonight, that you bless those that are making decisions and those that are making suggestions, Lord. We ask that you be a part of all of it. Lord, we also ask